Today I want to talk from the topic, angry enough. And we'll be using Jonah, the 4th chapter, as our text. I'm only going to read the first 4 verses, but we will include the whole thing. And it says, "But this was very displeasing to Jonah, and he became angry. He prayed to the Lord and said, 'O Lord, is this not what I said while I was still in my own country? That's why I fled to Tarshish at the beginning. For I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, and ready to relent from punishing. And now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live.' And the Lord said, 'Is it right for you to be angry?'" You know, one of my guilty pleasures is a reality TV show called 90 Day Fiancé. There's a whole franchise now, 90 Day Fiancé, Before the 90 Days, and Happily Ever After. I say reality in quotes because clearly these people can't really act the way they show up on TV. In every episode, someone blows up, cursing and yelling, and always saying the line, "That's it, I am not going to get married." That's as they're storming out of the room or running away from the car. Please don't judge me for watching this stuff. But it can't be real because nobody can really be as angry or as stupid as some of these people on this show. Or can they? I'm sure some of us have experienced an interaction or witnessed an exchange where someone went from 0 to 100 on the anger scale in no time. It may have been you. At times, anger comes out of left field, and it can be an old issue, maybe something that was never resolved. It happens frequently when families get together. Anger causes things to get out of hand. I think one of the worst inventions for the anger impulse was the cell phone. It used to be that when we got upset with someone, we had a natural buffer from the time we got upset until the time we were either face to face or got home to our telephone. Now we can call immediately, or at worst, we can text and commence an argument right away. Thankfully, those days are gone for me now, but I remember back a while ago when I think God saved me from myself. I was really upset with someone and I needed to give them a piece of my mind right away. I was at a conference in Birmingham, Alabama, and it was going to be a while before I got back to Stone Mountain. So I pulled out my cell phone to send a text during the meeting. But the phone slipped out of my hand and dove directly into a glass of orange juice that I had on the floor next to my chair. That gave me time to cool off. I think it was God's gift to me at that moment. In some cases, anger takes away our ability to make the best moves. I love what Aristotle said about anger. He said, anybody can become angry. That is easy, but to be angry with the right person and to the right degree and at the right time and for the right purpose and in the right way, that is not within everybody's power. It is not easy. In the text, God asked Jonah a question. And the Lord said, "Is it right for you to be angry?" Anger is not the problem. The issue is what we do in response to our anger. Jonah gives us an opportunity to reflect in our text. In the text for today, this is the 4th and final chapter of the book of Jonah that we've covered over the last 4 weeks. In this first chapter, Jonah went in the opposite direction from where God directed him to go. Then he got on a ship going in the wrong direction, and he ended up being thrown overboard from that ship. In the second chapter, Jonah had some time to think about things while he was in the belly of a fish. In chapter 3, Jonah finally went to Nineveh, but he delivered a skewed message saying Nineveh would be overthrown instead of saying Nineveh overturns. The Ninevites did overturn. They changed their ways, and they were not overthrown or destroyed. And today we pick up right after God decided not to bring any harm to the Ninevites, much to Jonah's vexation. In the 4th chapter, we find Jonah venting a level of anger against God, basically because he knew God's essence included the characteristics of love, things like mercy and grace. Jonah says that's why he didn't go to Nineveh with a message of destruction, because he knew God would probably relent. When God did not destroy Nineveh, Jonah said he was angry enough to die. What was that about? Why angry enough to die over the good fortune of an entire country of people? Sometimes anger just does not make sense. The first thing to note in this chapter, this 4th chapter, is that God never affirmed nor condemned Jonah's anger. Anger is an emotion that's got a bad rap for a couple of reasons. In a Christian context, anger has been seen by many as sinful, although the Old Testament does speak of God's anger, and the New Testament speaks of Jesus being angry. He was angry in the temple. He cursed a fig tree. And in other places, the scriptures speaks of being slow to anger or not letting the sun go down on our anger. So clearly, anger isn't what is sinful. It's what we do about anger that can be sinful. Let me take a moment to explain what I mean when I say sinful. Per the Webster Dictionary definition, one of the definitions that I agree with is sin is a vitiated state of human nature in which the self is estranged from God. So if we believe God is love, sin would be acting in a way that is devoid of love. Using that definition of sin, clearly we've witnessed some sinful things in our society. But anger itself is not inherently sinful. Anger is one of the basic human emotions, such as happiness, sadness, anxiety, or disgust. It's a survival response. It has historically been associated with the fight, flight, or freeze response. Anger is just a signal to respond, but it is the trigger and the response that makes the difference. Anger can be helpful when the trigger, say the killing of another Black person at the hands of the police, gives rise to a response, something like a peaceful protest against injustice. I like what Malcolm X said. He said, usually when people are sad, they don't do anything. They just cry over their condition. But when they get angry, they bring about a change. On a personal level, anger can be helpful when one is falsely accused or when someone harms someone we care about. Anger can motivate us to hold people and systems accountable for their actions. But anger can also be destructive, like when fear of the other causes people in power to physically or systematically attack a group of people, like was done to the Muslims in this country. On a personal level, anger that is too frequently or too easily mobilized can cause physical damage. I read in Psychology Today, prolonged release of stress hormones that accompany anger can destroy neurons in the area of the brain associated with judgment and short-term memory, and it can also weaken the immune system. In the text, Jonah had an unhealthy form of anger. He was angry at God for God doing what God does. As Jonah said, he was angry enough to die. In Jonah's case, it was his ego that was holding him in this damaging condition of anger. Jonah openly and directly expressed his anger to God. You know, that's something that during my time as a pastor, I've often suggested that people do. Get angry at God, express it. If we believe God loves us, and if we have a relationship with that power, we ought to be able to release our joys, our gratitude, and our anger. Often people get angry at God due to an unfavorable or devastating diagnosis. I've seen anger at God in persons going through the stages of grief. People get angry at God all the time because of unanswered prayers. I think I was a little angry at God on the night of the last presidential election. Honest expression helps us to maintain a strong bond to the divine. The same is true for our relationships with each other. Anger needs to be expressed in healthy, controlled, and open ways. To hold it in ends up in damaged relationships and or leads to passive-aggressive interactions. Both aggressive and passive-aggressive behaviors can destroy relationships. Anger needs to be experienced, and then it needs to be released. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "For every minute you remain angry, you give up 60 seconds of peace of mind." And Joan London, in the book Wake Up Calls, Making the Most Out of Every Day, said, "A heart filled with anger has no room for love." So we need to consider a few things when we're angry. Number one, we need to do a bit of self-examination to figure out, am I really angry and why am I angry? Are you tired or are you hungry? Is this some sort of ego response like Jonah had? Take out some time to figure out what's going on before responding to anger. Number two, try to see the complexity of the issue, because anger often narrows our focus, causing us to ignore or to oversimplify the context. Number three, have compassion. Consider the other person's viewpoint. Walk in their shoes for a second. And number four, take time to thoroughly consider the most thoughtful response to your anger. Jonah just got angry with God. He had no beef with the Ninevites. His ego just could not move past God's mercy and grace towards the Ninevites. His pride just could not take the fact that the message he delivered to the Ninevites did not materialize in the way he saw it. In the text, God gave Jonah many opportunities to think about his anger. At one point, Jonah sat down on a hill outside of Nineveh to watch to see what would happen to the city. And while he sat there, a bush grew over his head and provided a shade to the sun that was beating down on him. But then a worm destroyed the bush. The obliteration of the bush made Jonah angrier, so he just sat there steaming. His anger wasn't getting him anywhere, and it wasn't going anywhere. When God confronted Jonah about the anger, God didn't condemn the anger in of itself, because anger is a necessary emotion. But we need to keep our anger in perspective and manage it per the situation. Some anger is righteous, justified anger. Some anger is a manifestation of an uncontrolled reaction. We should be angry about some things. In simple situations where love is absent, our anger should be fueled and controlled by love. I remember some years ago speaking at a conference, I think it was a Creating Change conference, and I said to the activists that we need to assess if our activism is driven by love for the people for which we speak. Because if there's no love, there's no authentic power to our work. Just being angry is not enough. Anger should not be misdirected or exaggerated, but anger should be controlled by context. We need to be angry enough for the situation. Like, we must be angry enough to stand up for love lived out as mercy and justice without letting our anger grow into hate. We should be angry enough to vote, no matter how much people try to suppress or intimidate us. God confronted Jonah about his anger, asking, why he was angry at a bush he didn't grow, and why he was angry about the preservation of Nineveh. God put it this way: and should I not be concerned about Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 people who do not know their right hand from their left, and also many animals? That's how the book of Jonah ends. It ends like any good story that ends with a question. It draws people in. In this case, that makes each of us Jonah. So what is your Nineveh? In what ways are we heading in the wrong direction like Jonah tried to do? Is it time for us to take some downtime for transformation like Jonah had to do in the belly of the fish? Do we manipulate communication in any way as Jonah delivered a damning message to the Ninevites? And finally, are we carrying any loveless anger that we need to examine? The book of Jonah enables all of us, no matter what our egos are telling us, to take another look, because there's always something to be gained by self-examination. Wasn't it Socrates who said, the unexamined life is not worth living? I wouldn't go that far, but I will say the self-examined life enables authentic power. I'm glad today because the story of Jonah reminds us in many ways that no matter who we are or no matter what we've done, God, love, always sees the best in us. Just like God saw the great city of Nineveh when everybody else saw only an evil and dangerous place. You know, through our storms, places of isolation, doing our work, working through our stuff, through it all, God is always on our side. Love is still with us. We may be a little physically, emotionally, and spiritually bruised, but we come out being much more than we were when we started our journey. Jonah tried to run and got mad because he knew the nature of God. We can be glad today because it is also God's nature to love us uncontrollably. So no matter what kind of journey you might be on, always remember, God is always with you. Thanks for listening. Join us next week at 10 a.m. Eastern Time via Zoom. Send me an email to drkathi100@gmail.com. That's drkathi100@gmail.com. And I'll send you the information so you can join by Zoom. Well, have a great week.